Welcome to part 18 of our series on building a Zelda-Like game in Phaser 3. In this video, we'll introduce new player states to handle interactions with objects. We'll add hold, lift, move while holding, and open chest states, allowing our player to pick up, carry, and interact with various objects dynamically. If you're new here, this is part of a full series where we create a Zelda-inspired game from scratch. Check out the playlist link in the description to start from the beginning. Alright, let's dive in and expand our state machine. So for our character states, we need to add 4 new states to our state machine. We'll be adding in a state for when our player opens up one of our chests. We'll add in a state for when our player is lifting up an object. And then we'll have 2 states for when our character is actually carrying that object and moving around our scene. To add in these new states, let's go into our character states file. Let's add in our lift state. We'll do our open chest state. Then we'll do idle holding state. And then we'll do move holding state. Next, we need to create our new states. Let's go into our states, our character folder. We'll make a new file. We'll do our lift state first. Let's go into our idle state. We'll copy our logic. Let's paste that into our lift state. We'll update our class name. We'll update our reference. Oh, this should be lift, not life. Next, let's add in our open chest state. So we'll do open chest state. We'll copy over our class. We'll update our state name. Now we'll do our idle holding state. Copy over our class. Let's update our class name. So we'll do idle holding state. We'll update our state name. Finally, we'll have our move holding state. We'll update our class name. And we'll update our reference. So now for the actual logic in our states, let's jump back to our lift state. When we transition to our lift state, when we call our onEnter method, we'll want to reset our velocity for our game object, and then we'll want to play our animation for lifting up the object that we're going to be carrying. So for this, let's move our animation down below after we reset our velocity. And now for our animation, we want to do our lift animation. And so then on our onUpdate method, we want to wait until our animation is finished, and then once it's finished, we'll transition to our idle holding state. So we'll add an if state, we'll do if this, our game object, if our animation component, if an animation is currently playing, we just want to return early. Once that animation's done, now we'll go to our idle holding state. So next, let's jump over to our idle holding state. When we transition to this state, we'll want to do our animation for our idle hold. So let's update our animation name. We'll then want to reset our velocity on our game object. So then down in our onUpdate method, we'll want to check to see if we have any input, and if there is input, we'll want to transition to our move holding state. One last change we'll need to add to our onUpdate method is we need to check to see if the player tried to throw the object they're carrying, and if they did, then we want to go back to our idle state. And so we're just going to do if our controls, if our action key was just down, then we want to transition to our different states. Let's copy this, we'll paste it, and now we want to go back to our idle state. And then we want to return early so we don't do our other logic, but then we're going to add a to-do that we actually need to throw our item. Next, let's jump over to our open chest state. So for this state, we won't need to do anything on our onUpdate method, so let's remove that logic. Alright, so for our onEnter method, one of the things we're going to expect when we call this method is we're going to expect our chest that our player will be interacting with. So let's add in our args. This will be an unknown array. And we'll add in our chest, so we'll do const chest will be equal to our args, our first element, and we're going to type that as our chest. Now in this state, we'll want to reset our body's velocity, and then we want to play our animation for lifting up our game object. So we're going to move this animation to take place after we reset our velocity. Now let's do our lift animation, and then we'll want to listen for our callback for once our animation's done. That way we can transition to our idle state. So we'll do this, we'll do our state machine, let's do set state, and now we'll do our character states, and we want to do our idle state. Now for the time being, we're just going to console log out the chest from our onEnter method. Next, let's jump over to our move holding state. So now for our move holding state, let's get rid of our onEnter method. And so for our onUpdate method, we're going to want to copy a lot of the logic that we're currently doing in our move state. So for the time being, let's copy over our private methods and copy over our onUpdate method. We'll come back to our move holding state, and let's replace our onUpdate method. Alright, so for our move holding state, if we have no input from the player, instead of going to our idle state, we want to transition back to our idle holding state so our player will still be holding our item. Besides that, most of our other logic is going to remain the same, where if the player provides input, we'll need to move our player's game object around our scene. Besides that, we'll need to update the game object our player is currently carrying to have a new position based on where our player moved to. And then for the rest of our code, the only other change we'll need to make is in our animation for when we're doing our walk, we want to do our walk hold animation. Now then let's go ahead and fix our imports and let's save. So now that we have our new states, let's jump over to our player class and we'll create our new states for our player and we'll add in our new animations. So down where we have our state machine and we add our states, let's copy our line for adding our states and we'll paste it 4 times. We'll start off by adding in our lift state. Next, let's do our open chest state. Then we'll have our idle holding state. And now we'll have our move holding state. Next, we'll need to add in our new animations. So let's come up to our animation configuration. I'm going to copy our keys for our idle. Let's paste those down here. So now we'll have idle and we'll do hold down. So I'm just going to copy hold and we're going to go ahead and paste those in. Now for animation keys, we want to do idle, hold down. I'm going to copy that. We'll paste it. Now we'll do hold up and then we'll do hold side. For this animation, we'll want it to repeat. Now I'm going to do the same thing for walk. So we'll copy our 4 keys. Let's paste those down here. Now we'll have walk, hold down. I'm going to copy that and we'll repeat. Now for animation, we'll do walk, hold down. Now we'll have walk, hold up, and then walk, hold side. We'll want that animation to repeat as well. Finally, we need to add in our keys for our lift state. So I'm going to copy these 4 keys again. We'll paste them. And now we'll do lift down. So I'm going to copy lift. Now we'll have lift up, lift left, and lift right. And so for our player animation keys, we'll have lift down, lift up, and lift side. And now for our lift animation, we do not want this one to repeat, and so we're going to set that to 0. Now if we want to test our changes, we just need to update our existing move state to allow us to transition to our new states. So let's open up our move state. So now in our move state, after we do our check to see if there's been any input provided, we'll now check to see if there's any game objects our player can interact with, and if they press the key to interact with it, then we'll transition to our new state. So for this, we're just going to add a new method to our class, and so we're going to do if, we'll say this, and so for our method name, we'll do check if object was interacted with. And so for this method, we'll pass through our controls, and then we're going to expect this to return a Boolean, and so if it returns true, then we just want to return early from our onUpdate method. Let's copy our method name. We'll come down to the bottom of our class. Let's paste that in. So we'll receive an argument of our controls, and we expect this to return a Boolean. So now in our method, first we'll want to grab our collides object component from our game object. So let's do const, we'll do collide component. We're going to set that equal to our colliding objects component. We want to get component. Let's add in our type. Now we'll pass in our game object. Now we'll want to make sure we actually have that component. So if our collide component is undefined, or if there's no objects in our collides component, so we'll do our collide component, our objects, dot length is equal to 0, then we can go ahead and return false. So now if there are objects our player is colliding with, we want to see if they have that interactive object component on that object. So we'll grab our first object from our array. So we'll do our collision object. We're going to set that equal to our collide component, our objects. We want to grab that first element. Now we want to grab that interactive object component. So we'll do const interactive object component. And so I'm just going to copy this line here for we'll grab a component. We'll update our component name. And we'll do our interactive object component. But instead of passing our game object, now we want to pass in our collision object. So next, if that object does not have an interactive object component, we can't interact with that object. So we'll do if our interactive object component is undefined, then we want to return false. Now at this point, our player is colliding with an object. It's an object we can interact with, and now we want to see if our player has pressed the key for interacting with the object. So we'll do if, we'll do not, our controls is action key just down. That means they did not press our action key. And so if our action key is not down, we want to return false. So now that the player has shown that they want to interact with our object, we now need to check our interactive object type and transition to the appropriate state. So we'll do if our interactive object component, if our object type is our interactive object type of pickup, we want to go to our lift state. And so we'll do this, our state machine. We'll do set state. We'll do our character states and we'll do our lift state. We'll go ahead and return true since now we are transitioning to a new state. We'll copy that block of code. Next, we'll have our open interactive type. We want to go to our open chest state. And then for our last type, we'll have auto. And when we have this type of object, we don't need to do anything. So we want to return false, and we won't transition to a new state. Finally, we're going to add in our exhaustive guard to make sure we cover all of our options. And so we'll have our interactive object type, and we'll do our object type. With our new state logic in place, we should be able to test our state transitions. Real quick, I'm going to go into my configuration. I'm going to turn off debug, and so then that way we can see our character more clearly. Now if we come over to our browser, let's have our player go over to our chest. If we press our action key while we're moving, we should see our player do our animation for lifting over to lift up our object. Now if we go over to our big chest, we should also see the same thing where our player reacts to our game object, and then we'll also see our console log lines for where we expect our chest to be passed. Next, if we go over to our pot game object, if we press our action key, our player should transition to our lift state, followed by our idle hold state, and if our player moves around, we play our animation for our move hold state. Now if we press our action key, our player should drop their hands down to show we go back to our idle state. Nice. Now that we've tested our transitions to our new states are working properly, we're going to work on refactoring our move state and our move holding state. Currently, these two states have a lot of code in common, and so we're going to create a new base class that both of these will inherit from. To do that, let's make a new state. So under our states character folder, we'll make a new file. We'll call this our base move state. Let's copy all of our code from our move holding state. We'll update our class name and we'll do base move state. And let's make this an abstract class. So now in this class, we want to remove anything that's specific to a particular state from this class and just keep our code that's in common. For now, let's minimize our onUpdate method. Let's start with our update velocity. So we'll need this for both of our classes. We're going to change this from private to be protected so we can use it in both of our classes. We can keep our logic the same. We'll do the same thing for normalized velocity. And so right now, how our code is structured, we don't have to change anything here. So then for our update direction method, if we want to reuse this method, we need a way to pass in our prefix for our animation that we need to do here. To do that, let's update our constructor. So now in our constructor, we'll add a new argument, and we're going to call this move animation prefix. And for this, we're going to either expect walk or walk hold. Now we'll want to store this on our class, and so we'll do protected. We'll do our move animation prefix. Just going to copy our type here. So now we'll do this, we'll do our move animation prefix, will be equal to our argument. So down in our update direction method, let's remove our walk hold, and we'll change this to be this, and our move animation prefix. So real quick, since we're making this protected, let's add in our underscore. We'll just keep our code consistent. Now let's update our method to be protected instead of private. So now in our onUpdate method, let's update our code references, so we use our new method names. And so currently in our onUpdate method, first we grab our controls and we check to see if there's no input. If there's no input, then we transition to a different state. So right now this logic is common between our two classes, but the state we transition to is not. So one thing we can do here is we can move our check here for no input. We'll move that to a new method. So let's do protected. We'll do is no input movement. We'll have this return a Boolean value, and then we'll expect our controls to be provided as an argument. We'll have our type be our input component. Let's copy this code here, we'll paste it, and we don't need to do our if statement. Let's get rid of that. And we're just going to do return if none of our controls are being pressed down. So let's remove that code here from our onUpdate. Alright, so now in our onUpdate method, all we have left is we grab a reference to our controls and we update our player's velocity based on that input. For our move holding state, we'll want to do that same logic, but we'll also want to update our game object's position to follow where our player is moving. For our move state, we want to do that same logic. We have these additional checks we want to do, like checking to see if our player can interact with a game object. Since we need this logic in both places, we're going to move this from out of our onUpdate method into a new protected method. So let's copy our protected, and we're just going to call this handle character movement. And so one last change we need to do to our base move state class is we need to add an argument for passing through our state name that we need to pass to our super method. So we'll add a new argument. We're going to call this state name. We'll just have this be a string. And now when we call super, we're just going to pass through state name instead of having our hard-coded value. So now with our changes, we should be able to update our two states. Let's jump over to our move holding state. Let's update our base class that we extend, and so we'll have our base move state. Now when we call super, we'll pass in our state name, our game object, and now for our prefix, we want to do walk hold. Alright, so now in our onUpdate method, first let's grab a reference to our controls. Once we have our controls, we want to see if there's been no input provided. And so we'll do if this is no input movement. We'll pass in our controls. And so if that's true, now we want to go to our idle holding state. So we're going to copy this. We'll move that to here. We'll remove this logic here. After this, we'll now want to call our new handle character movement method. And now that's going to do all of the logic we were doing here, where we update our player's velocity. So let's get rid of that code. And now we can get rid of all of our other private methods from our class. One other thing we'll want to do in our move holding state that we don't have code for currently is if our action key was pressed, we want to throw our item. So let's open up our idle holding state. Let's copy our code for throwing our item. So down in our onUpdate method, let's grab our code here for throwing the item. And now we're going to add that check right above our no input movement check. So now let's update our imports to remove our unused imports. And let's go ahead and save. Now let's jump over to our move state. For our move state, let's update our class that we're extending. And so we'll have our base move state. Now for our prefix, we'll do walk. Let's jump over to our move holding state. We're going to copy our code here before we transition to our idle state. Now we just want to update our state name. So remove this logic here. We'll want to keep our check to see if our object was interacted with. And if our object was not interacted with, now we want to do our character movement. So let's copy this. We'll paste that down here. And now we can remove the rest of our logic that's tied to updating our player's velocity. And let's get rid of our private methods for our velocity. And let's go ahead and clean up our imports. And now if we save, we should be able to test our changes and make sure everything's still working. So if we have a player move around our scene, let's try interacting with one of our objects. If we interact with our chest, we go to the right state. And now finally, let's try picking up our pot. So we transition to our lift state, followed by idle holding. And if we try moving, we go to our move hold state. Nice. That's it for this part of the series. If you found this helpful, be sure to hit the like button. It really helps out the channel. And if you're following along, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next video. If you have any questions or want to share your progress, drop a comment below. I'd love to hear from you. Alright, thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next one.